Welcome to all of Tree Community Spokane. The following recording is from our Boker Shabbat or Sabbath morning teaching. Let's join our guest speaker, Erez Aiger from Shema Israel, as he begins teaching this powerful message.
Shabbat Shalom, Chaverim. Toda, Wade. No, I was just quipping to Marcella. I said, Wade is giving a fantastic lengthy message here. What am I needed for? Did a great job, Wade. I appreciate the insight.
Thank you.
As always, I wish I could be with you. I wish we could both, my wife Leah and I, could be with you. But it's always a blessing to be able to fellowship together, even if we're doing it virtually like this. So it's always wonderful. Many of the points that Wade hit were similar to the things that I addressed on Thursday evening at the Torah study. One of the elements, and I want to kind of connect this to the Hebrews chapter 3 study, or maybe at least the first portion of it. I hope that some of you were able to look at the PDF or maybe print it out. One of the main points that's addressed, that's a thread, a theme that spans the entirety of the scriptures, all the way from the Torah, the prophets, and the writings to Brit Chadasha, the new covenant, is the concept of community, one made up of many. And what we see in the Torah portion this week is that the Torah itself was national in its application. It was given to an entire people, a singular unit made up of many, many support mechanisms. And so too, the curses and the blessings were national in their implications, in that the entire nation and the destiny of the nation was predicated upon the behavior of individual support mechanisms, which was, is, and always will be the people. So every person's behavior had the opportunity to sway the scales towards judgment or towards blessing, okay? And that's why, in one of the points that I was trying to make on Thursday was this idea that hyper-focus on an enlarged community, a whole singular unit, can cause discouragement for the average singular person, because people are like, well, how is my behavior, how are my thoughts, my deeds, my words going to impact just little old me, impact this gigantic community? And I encourage people to view themselves as the spoke within a wheel. You are a pillar holding up a large set up on a foundation and holding up a large rooftop. And imagine millions of pillars. Imagine millions of spokes. Every single added structural support gives that building that much more longevity, okay? And prevents the wheel from crashing, prevents the roof from collapsing, okay? So be encouraged as individual singular units, so as view yourself as support mechanisms holding up the entirety of the structure itself. So the Torah was national in its application, the curses, the blessings, national in their implications. One verse that we read in Vayikra, Leviticus 26:11, and Wade read this, so I just want to read the one verse over again and give you a little bit of insight into one of the Hebrew words therein. Moreover, I will make myself, or my dwelling amongst you, the Mishkan. We know that's the Hebrew word there, the tabernacle, the tent. I will make my Mishkan within you, and my soul shall not abhor you. It's an interesting, when you look at this idea of abhorrence, the Hebrew there is velo tigal nafshi, my soul will not reject due to loathing, okay? And even more specifically, because the English language is challenged at times in really comprehending the essence of the Hebrew, because Hebrew is very poetic and very pictorial, English not as much, okay? Tigal, this idea of his soul is abhorring you, it's due to disgust, okay? That's probably the closest English word that you have to identify the principle in the word tigal. Rejection due to uncleanness, due to filthiness, due to disgust. Imagine when you see a picture or you watch a movie or you read something and your natural inclination is repulsion. You are disgusted by it. It's vile, it's gross, whatever English word you want to use. This is how God would view the people if they walked in Chilul Hashem, which is a desecration of the name. If they walked in national uncleanness and national impurity, it's as though the entirety of the nation was stricken with this tzara'at affliction, which afflicted the Metzorah, often translated as the leper, the white spot affliction that required people to be relegated to the outside of the camp, which necessitated this amazing priestly process to get the people back in. The entire nation, through the act of some, the entire nation would become unclean. So again, if you ever get discouraged or ask yourself, what effect or what impact do I have as a singular unit upon the whole? Read this text. The wicked and the righteous were swept away in all of Israel's punishments on a national level. Daniel, Ezekiel, throughout all the dispersions, whether it's Assyria, whether it's Babylon, it doesn't matter, whether it's Rome, whether it's Greece, it was all the same. The righteous equally paid a price in the same way that the wicked did. Okay. And I want to kind of leapfrog from that kind of foundational setting to the text of the study that I sent to everyone, which is a letter to the Hebrews, chapter 3, in which the author of the letter to the Hebrews, some argue Rav Shaul, Rabbi Paul, others argue it was a unique, separate author. That's not the point of today. The author was wrestling with the same principles. And in so, this author can very easily and clearly be seen as the individual who helped form part, if not all, of the foundation for this community, for this congregation of Yeshua-believing Hebrews, as the language would have you. Okay. One of the great struggles with this community, and you can see this in the believing Messianic communities found in the first chapters of the book of Revelation, was that there was a warning to even the righteous that the behavior of a few within the community would impact the entirety of the community. Because Yeshua was speaking through Yochanan in Revelation, telling him, you know, these are all wonderful things that you're doing, but I have these things against you. And he's speaking to several of the righteous people. And you know that because in several of the communities, he effectively states that you are condoning this behavior in your communities. You are allowing these transgressions, and these transgressions will impact not just the wicked, but they will also impact the righteous in your midst. Okay, and we talk about the context of the teachings, the heretical teachings of the Nicolaitans. Right now in our congregational gatherings, I'm going through a very lengthy, exhaustive study on the book of Revelation. And I've been hitting, we're still in chapter 2 right now, after 9 months. That's how in-depth we're going in it. And I'm going through all the communities right now. And you see throughout, again, the impact that the few have on the many, that the few have on the whole. And you had the Nicolaitans, but you also had those who were duplicitously following another lifestyle, the lifestyle that they were called out from, which was the temple cult worship of the Asia Minor area that were filled with all sorts of idol worship and licentiousness. And the lifestyle that most of these people were called out of and into faith in Yeshua, they were duplicitously, many of them were continuing in the cultural lifestyle of Asia Minor, but they were also pretending to walk in faithfulness to Yeshua and to Elohei Israel, the God of Israel. And of course, Yeshua saw this as an abhorrence and on many occasions threatened not only punishment, but complete isolation. Okay. So this thread of the many making up the whole and the impact of the actions of a few impacting the whole begins in the Torah and it goes all the way through the book of Revelation. So in the context that today we read about Hebrews chapter 3, Ha'igeret el ha'ivrim, which is the letter to the Hebrews. Let's read the text briefly here because it's short. We'll get into a few bullet points and I'll leave you at the end with the study and to kind of go through a little bit more exhaustively into a little bit of the breakdown and the Tanakh associations that the author of the letter to the Hebrews uses for foundation for his text here. Verse 1 of chapter 3 of Hebrews, therefore, brothers whom God has set apart, who share in the call from heaven, think carefully about Yeshua. Again, a warning, whom we acknowledge publicly as God's emissary and as Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He was faithful to God who appointed him, just as Moshe was faithful in all of God's house. But Yeshua deserves more honor than Moshe, just as the builder of the house deserves more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the one who built everything is God. You see, there's a quick switch up in that verse there that I just want to highlight briefly, that you go from a spiritual to a midrashic physical in the second half of the verse there. Yeshua deserves more honor than Moshe. Yeshua is the builder. Moshe is the house. He is indicative of the house of Israel. Okay. For every house, physical, again, this is an analogy, is built by someone, but the one who builds all houses and everything and the people that build houses is none other than God himself. This was the chasm of difference between Yeshua and Moshe himself. And it's the beauty of these midrashic structures is that you have a breakdown of the physical and the spiritual both meld into the other. But Yeshua, let me see, verse 5, also Moshe was faithful in all God's house as a servant given witness to things God would divulge later. He was a foreshadower, of course, in his teachings and also in his physical being. But the Messiah as son was faithful over God's house, overarching. And we are that house of his. Who is the we? Well, in the study, I break down and talk about the house of Israel. This is a letter to the Hebrews, to Yeshua-believing Jews who now understand that Yeshua is not the end of the law. He is the goal that the Torah aims for. He is Moshe embodied the way Moshe was always intended to be. Moshe was a redeemer. He was a precursor to the greater one that he was pointing to and pointing towards, and that was the Messiah himself. And we are that house of his, provided we hold firmly to the courage and confidence inspired by what we hope for. Did you hear that? Again, another tie-in to this week's Torah portion, a warning. We are that house as long as we hold firmly to the courage and confidence inspired by what we hope for. What is the warning that we read about in Brit Chadasha when it says that for those who have turned from God and from revelation of Yeshua, it would have been better for you to have never known him than to have known him and his revelation and then rejected him or then fallen away. Okay, that sort of connects, branches off from this. We are that house as long as we hold firmly to the courage and confidence inspired by what we hope for. Therefore, as the Ruach HaKodesh says today, if you hear God's voice, don't harden your hearts as you did in the bitter quarrel. On that day in the wilderness, when you put God to the test, yes, your fathers put me to the test. They challenged me and they saw my work for 40 years. Therefore, I was disgusted. Perfect application of the word, different context, same thing. He was repulsed, he was reviled, he was disgusted by that generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray. They have not understood how I do things. In my anger, I swore that they would not enter into my rest. Watch out, brothers, so that there will not be any one of you, singular, lacking heart, which could lead you to apostatize from the living God. Why the focus on one? Because the unit is made up of many ones. And every person's behavior has the potential of tipping the scales towards judgment or tipping the scales towards blessing and salvation. Okay? Because God's eternal focus is on the community. It's on the whole. In the same way that normative Judaism focuses on klal, all of Israel, al kol Israel, all the sons of Israel. Okay? Instead, keep exhorting each other every day as long as it is called today, so that none of you will become hardened by the deceit of sin. For we have become sharers in the Mashiach, provided, however, that we hold firmly to the conviction we began with. Did you catch that? Some people ask the question, can a person lose their salvation? When you look at the scriptures from a Hebraic perspective through the prophets, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, you realize that it's a very complex question, okay? Because people always like to try to trap you with this idea of once saved, always saved. Right? Can a person lose their salvation? What I hear here, for we have become sharers, you have become a part of the Messiah's family. However, only if you hold to the conviction, which means if you lose your love, if you lose your conviction, if you once knew him and then begin to act as though you do not know him, what is the natural repercussion that you see in the Torah? What is the natural repercussion that you see here in Brit Chadasha? The structure of God's application to his family has never changed. His word never changes. His nature and his character has never changed. You are a part of the Messiah's family only as long as you hold firmly to the conviction that you begin with, right through until the end. The end is reached. Now, where it says today, if you hear God's voice, don't harden your hearts as you did in the bitter quarrel. I almost said squirrel. In the bitter quarrel. You see at the end of the study there that there is an extremely deep, sort of a triple connected messianic foreshadowing that involves multiple texts there in the breakdown of Hayom, the day, today. If you hear God's voice, what does it mean today? Well, Joshua talked about choose you this day to serve the Lord, because we know not what tomorrow brings. So when we talk about today, today refers idiomatically to the Mashiach. And I have this in sort of this is the top of the last page of the study here. Let's go back to the bottom of the second to last page. Breshit, Genesis 1:5. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. And God called the light day. Remember, this is a preliminary light that even the rabbis believed up until this day that this light is referred to by the rabbis as the light of the Mashiach. God had a name for the preliminary light. He called it day, Hayom, the day. This is a euphemism. It is a name for the Messiah himself. It is the light of the Messiah. Yeshua's name is the day, Hayom. Considering that this light was pronounced as day before any light-bearing luminaries were created, we see that much more clearly, not only Yeshua as Or HaOlam, or the light of the world, but that he was, is, and forever will be known as the day. Yeshua is today. And that we as sheep must submit to and pattern our lives after him. The word in English today refers idiomatically to the Mashiach. Thus hidden in the psalm declares, and you could translate it as such, because this is the message of the author of the letter to the Hebrews. Mashiach, Messiah, if you would hear his voice. So let's retranslate it as that. Verse 15. Now where it says, Messiah, if you hear his voice. Because what is the Messiah if not the voice of the Father? Proverbs chapter 8. He was the Chachma, the wisdom at the right hand of the Father. Yeshua is the embodiment of the word. He's the embodiment of the wisdom, of the light, of the radiance of the Father. He is the extended right arm of salvation. Through him, by him, and for him, all things leapt into existence. So, Messiah, if you hear his voice, this is a warning to the community. Don't harden your hearts as you did in the bitter quarrel. You see that the sins of the fathers at Masa and Merivah were equivalent to the rejection of Yeshua by this modern generation. It was tantamount to the same thing. You see what happened to the fathers when they sinned against God and they quarreled, and they ended up having to deal with 40 extended years in the wilderness? What you are doing now in your potential rejection of Yeshua and diminishing his value and lowering him to that of mere man, that there's no difference between Moshe and Yeshua, you are effectively committing the same grave sin as the fathers did in the wilderness, and you are potentially bringing upon yourself another wilderness experience in so doing. Yeshua, Messiah, if you hear the voice. It's a warning. That's a fulfillment of the foreshadowing that we see in the Torah. Verse 16, who were the people who after they heard quarreled so bitterly? All those whom Moshe brought out of Egypt. These are the three questions. And with whom was God disgusted for 40 years? Of course, it was those who sinned. Yes, they fell dead in the wilderness. And to whom was it that he swore would not enter the rest? To those who were disobedient. 2 + 2 is 4 on all three of these questions. So we see that they were unable to enter because of lack of trust. You see, the author of the letter to the Hebrews is using ancient examples to help the people understand that what they're doing is effectively the equivalent of the falling short of the fathers. You're no different. You will pay the same price because you are doing the same thing. The people treated poorly the rock in the wilderness. Moshe himself struck the rock out of emotion and out of anger. And we read in the Torah that Moshe was unable to enter into the land of promise because of his actions toward the rock with the staff. Different study. I don't want to focus entirely on that today. The rock gave living water to the people and enabled the people to sustain, because God called the people of Israel an eternal people before him. Even in sin, he provided life for them. Same thing here. Now imagine you being the recipient of this letter, the letter to the Hebrews. Imagine being one so immature, though you have been so richly equipped. You have devolved in your complacency to the point where you are about to bring upon yourself and the community, the whole, through the actions of a few, a great judgment. Your actions are the equivalent, tantamount to what happened in the past. How struck to your heart would you be? Again, the reason I say these things is, again, I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to a modern audience. And the goal is to help you to understand that the actions of one can impact the structural integrity of the whole. Every single one of us has an opportunity to either structurally support or break down and lessen the support. You place yourself upon the scale, you have the opportunity to teeter the community that much closer to salvation and blessing, or that much more closer to cursing and judgment. Okay, think about that. The action of a few impacts the many, impacts the whole. Okay, and all you have to do to bolster that argument is look at the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and you see on numerous occasions that the righteous were swept away along with the wicked on many, many historical examples. Okay, so our sins do not just impact ourselves, they impact everyone. Okay. So that's the text in its entirety, at least as far as the actual reading of Hebrews chapter 3. So let's talk about hope. What is the hope? Who is the hope of Israel? Let's go to page, I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity to look at the study or to print it out. I would say this is page 5, where we talk about the two different words associated with hope in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, two Hebrew words, tikvah and mikvah, both coming from this idea, the sholish, the root kavah, which is a gathering of something. Most in tikvah, it's a gathering of cords, the tolat shani, the red threads that made up the rope that Achav lowered, the Rahab lowered from her window in order to give indication to those who were coming to destroy the area that her and her family were to be saved. Okay. That's one of the ways in which we understand, one of the two ways that we understand in the Hebrew, the concept of hope, the red thread, tolat shani. Okay. Her rope was made up of many cords. Okay. The other, of course, is mikvah. Both tikvah, hope, tikvat Israel, the hope of Israel, and mikvah are the same thing. They come from the same root kavah, the gathering. Now, in mikvah, what is the gathering? The gathering is of many waters. Okay, Genesis 1:9 is the first time in the Torah that we read the concept of hope, found in the principle of mikvah. Then Adonai said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered, kavah, mikvah, the waters will be gathered into one place, and then let the dry land appear in the midst of that gathering. So view it like this: water as far as the eye can see. All that existed was water. There was no land. Okay, that was the mikvah. A large pool of water, the whole earth is covered in. The hope is the gathering of all those waters. And from that hope rises land from the midst of the water, and the land is born again. The land is new, it's fresh. It's as a child emerging from the womb. From the gathering of waters, from the hope, rises life. Okay. So in the Messiah, who is Tikvat Israel, who is the hope of Israel, Yeshua, immersed in him, that gathering is life. It's hope. Let me read this from the study. This mikvah, it's a gathering of waters, of course. It is also the Hebrew word for ritual water immersion. And from it grew the Christian practice known as baptism. The concept of ritual immersion is first seen in this creation narrative, Genesis 1:9, that I read earlier. Each time a person would go through ritual immersion, this mikvah, they were to emerge from the water as the new land rose out of the gathering of waters during creation, brand new in every way. By the first century, the waters of regeneration, quote unquote, became more closely connected with the portrait of childbirth. The person was then referred to as born again, born anew. This is where the principle comes from. Whether by the rising up of land from within the gathering of waters, or by the birth of a child, mikvah represented hope and newness, rebirth. When Yeshua spoke of being born again, it had everything to do with being immersed into the refreshing, regenerating, saving waters of Messiah himself. But the implications and associations go back all the way to the creation narrative. And what did Yeshua say to Nakdimon when he talked about being born again? And he said, what does that mean? And he says, you are a teacher in Israel and you do not know what this means? Okay. He wasn't simply talking about identifying him as the hope of Israel. He's talking about the principles that go all the way back to the creation. What does mikvah mean? What does it mean to be born again? It's the land rising from the water. It's a child emerging from the womb. And in the first century, those who would become Bnei Avraham, which were sons of Abraham, which was a name given to people who were not ethnically Jewish, who converted to the religion of the Jewish religion of the day. They were, when they would rise from the mikvah, from the waters, because mikvah was required in order to go through the conversionary process, though the witnesses there would declare, you have been born anew as though you were a newborn child. That was a declaration verbally as the person came up the last time from the water. You symbolized the landmass coming, emerging from the waters themselves as a child born anew. People actually proclaimed that for those who went through the conversionary process. So let's bring it back again to the singular unit made up of many. The landmass coming from the water. Before the judgment of God, the mass of land was one mass of land, right? It wasn't until, at least in my understanding, archaeologically, there's all sorts of interesting arguments and implications. But after the flood, we had the breaking up of the continents, right? People ended up in different areas, different land masses. And one of the reasons, I believe, that took place on a spiritual level was that God already saw that man had in his mind the ability to unite against him. So God would divide the people not simply by language, but also logistically by landmass and by distances. Okay. Because he knew that some could corrupt the whole. Okay. So again, another principle that sort of branches off this idea of being born again, one landmass. God's focus is on the whole. It has always been about the whole. And landmass is made up of all sorts of things, all the way down to the granular level, from rocks to stones to hills to mountains. It's made up of all sorts of topographical, things. Okay. So the focus is to bring salvation to the whole world once again. It's possible that topographically, geologically, the world could come together again in the new, that the new earth is no longer separated by the continents. It's now brought together, and you will have the landmass in its original form prior to the adulteration of God's ways and the sin of man. It will be brought back together as one whole unit in the midst of the kavah, the gathering of waters, and it will be restored to its original form. In the same way that our eternal destiny on a cycle is coming back to Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. This journey that we are on, this adventure that we are on, as God's people. We're on a ride. We're along for the ride. And that ride is multi-millennia long. And the purpose of this ride is to restore the proper order of things. Mankind sinned. God's way, the intent, although he knew what would happen, the plan had to shift. He allowed it to happen, but not all of it was his perfect will and his perfect desire. He allowed it to happen for a reason, though. We deviated, and everything else deviated accordingly. And we are now on a cyclical ride, heading back to the origin of all things. The origin is none other than Gan Eden, paradise, the Garden of Eden. That is our desired, desired destination. God's desire has been the entire time to restore mankind and to fellowship with mankind in Gan Eden in the same way that he fellowshiped with Adam on a one-to-one singular level in the garden. Adam and Chava's behavior in the wilderness impacted the whole, impacted everything, everyone. The few and the decisions of a few changed the way of life and the structure and the logistics and the patterns and everything in life for the whole, for the many. Okay. So when you read through this text of Hebrews, and again, on your own, you can go through the study. It's 9 or 10 pages long. Recognize and understand the impact of your decisions on the many, your words and your actions. Is it any wonder then in the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, in the book of Revelation, we recognize and know that two things will we be judged by: our words and our actions. Why so much focus on words and actions? Well, you have the principles of Lashon Hara and Motzeh and Ra, two Hebrew words that make up the Metzorah, the white spot afflicted individual, which is evil speech, evil tongue, Lashon Hara. Once you shake out the feathers of a pillow, and I shared this at the Torah study a few weeks ago, you can never recapture the pillow. You squeeze the toothpaste, you can't get the toothpaste back into the tube. Such is the impact of words. Actions, what we do impacts everything around us. Every decision that you make has ramifications. Imagine the picture of a stone being tossed into a very still pool of water. How is it possible that a tiny pebble could impact a body of water? The ripples extend all the way to the shore. That's how easily a small decision can impact the whole. Every decision you make impacts your family, impacts yourself, impacts anyone that is in your sphere of influence, okay, in some capacity, some much more than others, which is why it's so critical for us to focus on our words, focus on our actions, and understand the disruptive nature of those things if misapplied. Evil speech and actions, okay? In a nutshell, you can see that that is effectively the theme, not only in the Torah, especially in this week's Torah portion, but also in Brit Chadasha, in the letter to the Hebrews, specifically here in this context, chapter 3, that the message has been given out. The truth is known. We have the past, we have the present, we have the future. We are without excuse. We are a blessed generation as a result of the information and the wisdom that has been given to us. There is nothing aside from the breakdown nuances of, say, Revelation and the chronology of how exactly things will play out. Those are mysterious to us. But we have the diagram. We have the understanding, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And we know how things end. So we are without excuse. So you have to understand that with all of that information, we have been supported with a foundation in the same way that the believing community of the Hebrews was supported with a foundation. But what was the lament of the author? They were empowered, they were taught, they were educated, but he said, I have this against you. All of you should be teachers by now. You have that much information, that much education and understanding, but you are not eating milk, or eating meat, you are drinking milk. You who should be teachers have to continually be taught yourself. Okay? And that was a great lament of the author, that they were lagging behind in their ability to apply and live life in the Messiah. And in so doing, in that complacency, they fell prey to bad teaching. They fell prey to disobedience, and they would fall prey to potential judgment for sin. And this is why he uses the analogies from the Torah. Don't think that you are different from the people of old. And he basically says, what you're doing now is the same exact thing that happened in the past. Watch yourselves, lest the end be the same for you. It's a powerful lesson for all of us as we go through these readings. And again, do not be discouraged as a singular supportive mechanism, because remember, you are helping prop up the structure of the kingdom of heaven on earth. A breakdown of one spoke weakens the integrity of the overall wheel. So be encouraged and recognize the level of importance that you have as a person in holding up the structure. Okay? Because when you let go, i.e., you make the wrong decisions, you sin, your support wanes, diminishes, and the overall structure begins to lose a little bit of integrity as a result. Okay? The many, or the large is made up by many. Okay? And the impact of the decisions of a few have potential negative impact on the many. This is a biblical principle from the Torah, the prophets' writings, all the way into Brit Chadasha. So I'll leave you with that. And again, I encourage you to go through the study. There is, I have many more where that came from, different sections. Book of Hebrews, I have quite a few. And I hope it aids you in your walk in some capacity. Let's pray. Abba, we praise you. Thank you for this time. Ta kadosh v'shimcha kadosh. You are holy. Your name is holy. Holy beings praise you every day. And as you have declared your people to be holy, we pray that we would reciprocate that back to you, thereby living lives of holiness worthy of the calling that you have placed upon us. We thank you for this time and for the season, and pray that you would strengthen the Chayalim, the soldiers in the land of Israel, especially in Gaza at this time, that you would raise them up and strengthen them like David, and that you would open up the eyes of your people Israel, the world over, to the messiahship of your beloved son Yeshua, that we would see within our lifetime the fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 12, that all of Israel will see the one who was pierced and weep for him as though it was their own firstborn son. We thank you for your power, for your unchanging grace, and your unmerited favor. The work accomplished through your Son to bring us all to glory and eternal life. We thank you in his beloved name. Amen.
Thank you for joining Olive Tree Community Spokane for today's message. Join us for 24/7 Messianic music and teaching just like this on Messianic Joy Radio. Go to live365.com or download the app Live365 and search for Messianic Joy. Shalom from Olive Tree Community Spokane.